We live in the first civilization in human history that has made happiness mandatory. Think about it. Every morning you wake up not just expected to survive, to work, to function, but to be happy, to optimize, to manifest, to find your bliss. And if you're not, well, there's an app for that. A course, a guru, a method. We've transformed an emotion into an industry and a fleeting feeling into a moral obligation. But here's what nobody wants to tell you. This obsession isn't making us happier. It's making us sick. Clinically, measurably, undeniably sick. The more we chase happiness, the more it runs from us. The harder we grip, the more it slips through our fingers. And in this desperate pursuit, we've created something far worse than unhappiness. We've created the hell of having to be happy. Alan Watts saw this trap coming decades ago. He called it humanity's most dangerous delusion. And he was right. Something profound has happened to us. Something so subtle, so insidious, that we've barely noticed we're drowning. We've become addicted to a feeling that was never meant to be permanent. We've turned happiness, this fleeting, ephemeral state, into the primary measure of a life well lived. And in doing so, we've created our own psychological hell. But why? Why do we do this to ourselves? Look deeper. Beneath the Instagram feeds and self-help books, beneath the meditation apps and positive affirmations, there's something more desperate at work. There's a terror so fundamental that we'll grasp at any promise of escape. The terror of being human, of being mortal, of being fundamentally uncertain about everything that matters. We've convinced ourselves that if we could just be happy enough, consistently enough, then somehow we'd be safe. Safe from loss, safe from meaninglessness, safe from the crushing weight of existence itself. But here's what we refuse to see. Happiness was never meant to save us from the human condition. It was meant to be part of it. When did we decide that our natural emotional range, the full spectrum of human experience, was a problem to be solved? When did we convince ourselves that sadness, anxiety, grief, and uncertainty were malfunctions rather than essential aspects of consciousness itself? Think about it. Really think about it. You wake up each morning with an unconscious demand that today should feel better than yesterday, that you should be more optimized, more grateful, more present. You check your emotional temperature like you're monitoring a fever, constantly asking, am I happy enough? Am I doing this right? And when the answer is no, when life feels flat or painful or simply ordinary, you don't think, this is also human. You think, I'm failing. You reach for techniques, strategies, solutions. You treat your inner life like a machine that needs better programming. You scroll through endless content promising that the right thought, the right practice, the right mindset shift will finally fix what you've decided is broken about being alive. But what if nothing is broken? What if the very attempt to fix yourself is what's causing the suffering? This is the trap Alan Watts saw so clearly. We've become convinced that we can think our way out of the human condition. We believe we can optimize our way to peace. We think we can control our way to contentment, and every attempt deepens the prison. Consider the psychology of it. The moment you make happiness a goal, you create its opposite as a failure. The moment you decide you should feel a certain way, you're at war with whatever you actually feel. The moment you try to force an emotional state, you split yourself in two. The part that should be happy and the part that's monitoring whether you've achieved it yet. This internal surveillance is exhausting. You become both the prisoner and the guard, constantly watching yourself for signs of insufficient joy, inadequate gratitude, improper mindfulness.
You live in a state of emotional performance anxiety, always one bad mood away from confirming that you're doing life wrong. And here's the cruelest part. The harder you try, the more elusive happiness becomes. Because happiness, real happiness, isn't something you can chase. It's something that emerges when you're not chasing anything at all. It's a byproduct of being fully present to whatever is, without needing it to be different. But we've forgotten how to be present to what is. We've trained ourselves to be present only to what should be. We experience life through the filter of how it's supposed to feel, rather than how it actually feels. We've become strangers to our own experience, tourists in our own lives, always looking for the better view, the perfect moment, the feeling that will finally justify our existence. This is why the statistics don't lie. Depression and anxiety aren't rising despite our obsession with happiness. They're rising because of it. Every technique we use to escape discomfort teaches us that discomfort is unbearable. Every strategy we employ to control our inner state reinforces the illusion that we should be in control. We've pathologized the human condition itself, made normalcy into a disorder, turned the natural ebb and flow of consciousness into evidence of personal failure. And in this madness, we've lost touch with something essential: the strange, mysterious, often difficult beauty of being human without trying to be anything else. Alan Watts understood this decades before we created apps to track our moods. He saw that our very attempt to grasp happiness would become the source of our misery. He called it the backwards law, the idea that the more you pursue something, the more it eludes you. The more you try to be happy, the unhappier you become. The more you try to be relaxed, the tenser you get. But he saw something else too. Something that might be our only way out of this self-created prison.
Alan Wilson Watts possessed a rare gift: the ability to see through the elaborate psychological games we play with ourselves. While most of us are trapped inside our own minds, convinced that our thoughts and feelings are reality itself, Watts stood outside, watching the whole performance with a mixture of compassion and amusement. He understood something that Western psychology was just beginning to grasp. The observer and the observed are not separate. The self that wants to be happy and the self that monitors whether it's happy enough, they're both constructions, elaborate fictions we've mistaken for reality. This insight came from his deep study of Eastern philosophy. But Watts wasn't interested in becoming another Western Buddhist spouting platitudes about detachment. He was interested in something far more radical: understanding why we create our own suffering with such precision, such dedication. He looked at Western civilization in the 20th century and saw something unprecedented in human history: a culture that had become completely identified with its own mental processes, a society that had convinced itself that thinking about life was the same as living it. We are living in a culture entirely hypnotized by the illusion of time, Watts observed, in which the so-called present moment is felt as nothing but an infinitesimal hairline between an all-powerfully causative past and an absorbingly important future. But it went deeper than our relationship with time. Watts saw that we had created a fundamental split in our experience of being human. We had divided ourselves into the controller and the controlled, the observer and the observed, the one who should be happy and the one who isn't happy enough. This division is the root of all our psychological suffering, not the circumstances of our lives, though they certainly matter, but our relationship to those circumstances, our insistence that they should be different, our conviction that we are somehow separate from our own experience. Watts called this the skin-encapsulated ego, the illusion that we are isolated beings trapped inside our bodies, separate from the world around us, responsible for managing and optimizing our internal states as if they were private property. But here's what made Watts dangerous to conventional thinking. He didn't just diagnose the problem. He showed how every solution we attempt actually reinforces it. You want to be more mindful? The very effort creates a split between the one who is mindful and the one who should be more mindful. You want to be present? The goal of presence creates a future-oriented project that takes you out of the present moment. You want to accept yourself as you are? The desire for self-acceptance implies there's currently a self that's unacceptable. This is what he meant by the backwards law, not just that effort defeats itself, but that the very structure of trying is the problem. The ego that wants to improve itself is the same ego that creates the sense of inadequacy that needs improving. It's like trying to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. The harder you pull, the more firmly planted your feet become. Watts saw that our obsession with happiness was just the latest version of this ancient mistake. We had turned an emotional state into a spiritual goal, a feeling into an identity project, a natural fluctuation into a measure of success or failure. This wasn't philosophy for philosophy's sake. Watts was diagnosing the core delusion of modern life, the belief that we can think our way out of the human condition, that we can control our way to contentment, that we can force our way to freedom. He understood that every technique, every practice, every method for achieving happiness was just another form of the same fundamental mistake, the attempt to improve what we imagine ourselves to be, rather than questioning whether that self exists in the first place. And this questioning, this willingness to look directly at the one who wants to be happy, was where real transformation became possible.
Here's the paradox that will shatter everything you think you know about happiness. The harder you chase it, the more it runs from you. But it's not just that effort defeats itself. It's that the very one doing the chasing is the source of what you're running from. Let me show you how this works in your actual life. You wake up tomorrow morning and decide, today I'm going to be happy. Today I'm going to be present, grateful, mindful. You set the intention, maybe even write it in your journal. You're going to catch yourself when you're negative, redirect your thoughts, choose joy. You've created an internal surveillance system where part of you is constantly watching the other part, evaluating, correcting, managing. You've turned your own consciousness into a performance that never quite measures up. Now you're walking through your day with this invisible clipboard, checking boxes. Am I grateful enough? Am I present enough? Am I choosing joy? And every time you catch yourself not being happy enough, what happens? You become unhappy about being unhappy. You suffer about your suffering. This is what Watts called the backwards law in action. The effort to be happy creates unhappiness about not being happy. The attempt to control your state creates anxiety about being out of control. The goal of acceptance creates resistance to what you haven't yet accepted. But here's where it gets truly devastating. You think the problem is that you're not trying hard enough. You think you need better techniques, stronger willpower, more consistent practice. You think the solution is more effort, not less. So you double down. You add meditation to morning gratitude. You stack mindfulness on top of positive thinking. You create elaborate systems for emotional regulation, mood tracking, spiritual optimization. You turn your inner life into a full-time job. And now you're not just unhappy, you're exhausted. exhausted from the constant self-monitoring, the perpetual self-improvement, the endless project of trying to feel the way you think you should be feeling. But happiness was never meant to be an achievement. Peace was never meant to be a project. Contentment was never meant to be conditional on your performance. Watch a child at play, truly absorbed in building something with blocks, or chasing bubbles, or examining a leaf. Are they trying to be happy? Are they working on their mindfulness? Are they practicing gratitude techniques? No. They're simply present to what's happening without the overlay of whether it should be making them happy. They're engaged with life directly, not through the filter of how they should be feeling about it. We've lost this capacity for direct engagement. We've trained ourselves to experience everything through the mediator of whether it's making us happy enough, whether we're responding to it correctly, whether we're extracting the proper amount of joy from each moment. We've become addicted to the middleman, the internal commentator that's constantly evaluating our experience instead of simply having it. This is why Watts talked about the ego as an illusion. Not because you don't exist, but because the you that's trying to be happy is a mental construction, a storyteller that's convinced itself it's the story. The ego that wants to be happy is the same ego that feels inadequate when it's not happy. The self that seeks peace is the same self that's disturbed by the absence of peace. The mind that pursues contentment is the same mind that's dissatisfied with what is. You're chasing your own shadow and wondering why you can never catch it. And this reveals the deepest truth about the happiness trap. There is no one to be happy. There's only experience happening, and then a secondary story about whether that experience is good enough. The pursuing self and the happiness it seeks, they're both phantoms.
This is where we stop pretending, where the comfortable lies fall away and we face what we've been running from. The pursuit of happiness never ends because it was never meant to end. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a mechanism designed to keep you searching forever. Think about it. If you actually achieved permanent happiness, what would happen to the self that seeks happiness? What would happen to the entire identity you've built around becoming better, more optimized, more enlightened? You would disappear. And that terrifies the ego more than any amount of suffering. So it keeps you on the hamster wheel. It convinces you that you're almost there, that you just need one more technique, one more insight, one more breakthrough. It feeds you just enough hope to keep you running, but never enough satisfaction to make you stop. This is the raw truth Watts understood. We don't want to escape suffering. We want to suffer in more sophisticated ways. We want to transform our crude anxieties into spiritual seeking. We want to upgrade our basic dissatisfaction into a noble quest for enlightenment. But it's still suffering. It's still the same fundamental rejection of what is in favor of what should be. Look at your spiritual bookshelf. Look at your meditation apps. Look at your endless workshops and retreats and courses. What are they really offering? More refined ways to avoid being fully human. Because being fully human means sitting with uncertainty without trying to resolve it. It means feeling pain without immediately reaching for a way out. It means experiencing emptiness without filling it with stories about growth and progress. It means accepting that you are not in control of your emotional state and never were. This acceptance isn't a technique. It's not something you do to get something else. It's the recognition that the controller is just another layer of the problem. When you truly see that there's no one steering the ship of consciousness, something extraordinary happens. Not happiness, that would just be another experience coming and going, but something deeper,
the end of the war with yourself. You stop trying to manage your experience and start living it. You stop performing life and start inhabiting it. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. It means you engage with life from presence rather than from the story of what your life should be providing you. You feel sadness without the commentary about how you shouldn't be sad. You experience joy without the anxiety about when it will disappear. You inhabit uncertainty without the compulsion to figure it out. This is what Watts meant when he talked about letting go. Not forcing yourself to release your grip, but recognizing that you were never holding on to anything in the first place. The happiness you were chasing was always here, not as a feeling, but as the very awareness in which all feelings appear and disappear. But recognizing this changes everything. And nothing. You're still human. You still feel pain, loss, confusion, fear, but you're no longer at war with being human. And that might be the only freedom we ever actually find.
So here we are, at the end of another exploration into the mechanics of human suffering. And if you're waiting for the solution, the technique, the way out, you've missed the point entirely. There is no way out. There never was. The very search for an exit is what keeps you trapped in the maze. But there's something else. Something that emerges when you stop trying to escape what you are. Alan Watts spent his life pointing to it, but he could never give it to you. Because it's not something you can acquire, it's something you already are, beneath all the layers of who you think you should become. You are not the seeker of happiness. You are not the one who suffers from its absence. You are the space in which both happiness and unhappiness appear, and the awareness that remains completely untouched by either. This awareness doesn't need to be happy. It doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. It's already complete, already whole, already free, not because it achieved freedom, but because it was never actually bound. The ego that wants to be happy, the self that monitors its emotional temperature, the identity that's always becoming something better, these are just passing weather patterns in the sky of consciousness. They come and go, but the sky remains unchanged. When you see this, really see it, not as a concept, but as a lived reality, something shifts, not dramatically, not in a way that solves all your problems or makes you perpetually blissful. You just stop fighting with yourself. You stop treating your experience as evidence of success or failure. You stop making your worth conditional on your emotional state. You become curious about what it means to be human, instead of trying to be a better version of human. You start living your life instead of constantly evaluating how well you're living it. The wound that drove you to seek happiness in the first place, the fundamental sense that something is wrong with being you, that wound starts to transform. Not because it heals, but because you stop trying to heal it. And in that stopping, you discover something Watts knew all along. The wound was never the problem. The problem was the war against the wound. When the war ends, you don't become happy. You become real. And reality, messy, uncertain, completely ordinary reality, turns out to be enough. Not because it gives you what you wanted, but because you stop demanding that it should. This is where the ache begins to echo with meaning. This is where you begin.
If this moved something inside you, stay. We're building something for those who don't fake it. Subscribe, not just for the content, but for the confrontation. And if this left a wound, maybe it was meant to. Sometimes, the best way to go deeper is to share the pain. Share it. Someone out there is still chasing their next emotional high, still believing that the right mindset will save them, still running from the very feelings that could set them free.
Watts's warning wasn't about giving up on happiness. It was about giving up the one who wants to be happy. Because when you stop trying to control your inner weather, you discover you were never separate from the storm. When you stop performing contentment, real peace becomes possible. When you stop chasing what you already are, the search finally ends. The seeker in you will resist this, but the awareness you've always been, it's already here.